Right. Sorry, Tomo. We're getting there. So basically, I need to then be. I'm trying to get the streaming to work to go onto YouTube, but there's a problem with that. So basically, what will happen is when we get to 7 o'clock, I will basically start the presentation. I will also paste the links to the slides into the chat. And then, based on what you've heard, if you can then ask me whatever questions come to mind or whatever is of interest to you, then you ask me. And then we enter into the discussion. People will be then asked to pose questions in the chat. And that then we can and then I'll answer those on the video.
Okay, so the last sentence was not clear for me. Can you please repeat?
So people will pose the questions in the chat.
No sound. Okay.
Wait, it's probably easy. I'm just going to have to stop having the video when I'm making the presentation because it's using too much bloody processing power. Hold on. That's going to have to go. Computer can't cope. Jesus.
So what is the idea? How you are going to begin? You are going to start the presentation, or
I will start the presentation and will present the first conclusions. And if then you can then moderate the discussion and pose me questions, then that will be basically the easiest way to do it.
okay? And let me know where I'm posting the questions.
You pose the questions in video, and other people will post the questions in the text chat, which you can get by clicking the icon at the bottom.
So I'm going to ordinary to ask the questions, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, right. So if I
Take your time.
if I play that like that, that's then show me what I'm sharing. Right. That's then sharing that window. And that's sharing like that. If I make that much larger like this, then it will share larger like that. Right, that'll do. And if I put the camera on, that will then show as well. Then I think we're pretty good. Right, if I shift that closer there. Put this up a bit further. Right. Right, that is a low-tech solution for sharing that, but it's gonna be the best we've got. Right, then I need to quickly move to YouTube. And then we're almost ready in 5 minutes. Right, so that's that. That goes back. But one is in as well, right? So almost there. Almost there, almost there. Why will the chat not load in for YouTube? Do. It doesn't make any difference, Sammy. That link I've just pasted in, that's the new link to the live, right? Can you paste that into the chat for the old link on the live? In Jitsi, because messages won't load because my computer's overheating. I'll do it, it's loaded now. Oh, I think it's almost there. Right. Right. So, right then. So, that is as good as we're gonna get it, I think. Right. Three minutes to go, almost ready. If I put that out like that. That then works full screen. Perfect. Right then. Right then. Okay, and if I turn that a fraction, then I'm good. Right, I think we're all fixed. I'm on mute. So thank you for logging in, everyone. We will start in 1 minute. I think that should be fine for you being able to watch the video, both directly those that are logged in on Jitsi, the video conferencing tool, and also those people on YouTube. I have Sammy in the room here as well, who's keeping an eye on the chat on YouTube. So if you're following on YouTube, you can only pose your questions there using the text chat. If you're in the Jitsi conference, you can also actually later on be able to pose your questions using video as well as using the text chat. So that should be how it should be working. I see we have 12 viewers at the moment logged in on YouTube, and we have half a dozen that are logged in on the Jitsi platform. So I think text speaking, I think we're just about ready to go. So let me just copy and paste the links into the relevant windows, and then we'll make a start in just a moment. Right, Huh?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Go to the cross-border rail website.
I'm not even on YouTube.
Cross-border rail.
That's Spreadshot. I don't have it.
Cross-border, just Google cross-border railway. Down. Here, this. Link to the slides and to the and put that also into YouTube. Okay. Right then. So let's make a start. So apologies for the slightly provisional. Oh wait, I'm muted. So apologies for the slightly provisional technological setup here this evening. It's been a bit of a struggle to get all of this working here from a village in rural France and using some open source tools. So we're streaming using Jitsi for the web stream, and that will be recorded and also then put onto YouTube. We have here in the conference Toma Bacic, an independent journalist who specializes in railway topics, who will be asking me some questions and partly moderating the discussion later on as well. As stated, you can pose your questions or leave your remarks in the chat in either YouTube or on Jitsi, and I'll do my best to manage to cover as many of those as I possibly can. I'm now going to switch over to showing the slides. You will then be able to see those on the screen in both places. The link to those slides will also be put, if it's not there already, will be put in a moment in the chat, so you can download the slides that I'm going to be speaking from, so you can peruse those at your leisure as well. So let's make a start. So I just over a week ago concluded the research phase of the cross-border rail project. I see that the slides are now in the chat. That's excellent. Thank you very much. So what did I? And that's a picture of the depot of Macedonian Railways in Skopje. More about that when I come to the section about Macedonia later on. This picture is from Erdut at the border between Croatia and Serbia. So what is the problem? Those of you that are signed in here for the webinar probably know the problem relatively well already. National rail systems in Europe work comparatively well, but once you cross a border train, everything gets more complicated. The infrastructure, the level of service, timetables, and ticketing are all of a poorer quality. These problems are cross-border, so the European Union should be called upon to fix them. They exist very much at internal borders of the European Union, which I've been researching in 2022 and 2023. And the problem now is also the same in Southeastern Europe, in non-EU countries, where the European Union is investing. And that's why I went and investigated all of those borders in the summer of this year, concluding just over a week ago. So that's the central problem. It's a problem which is shared at internal borders and external borders of the EU, and indeed borders between non-EU European countries. What was cross-border rail, for those that have not encountered it yet? It started in 2022 when I crossed all of the internal borders of the European Union you can cross by train. In 2023, I went back to all of Germany's borders and went back to Spain, Portugal, and to Central Europe. And then in 2024, I've started on the issues of non-EU Southeastern Europe. And where there are no trains anymore, cross the border on a folding bicycle. The picture in the screen behind is a cross-border line between Čakovec and Kotoriba in Hungary, which has only freight trains operating at the moment and no passenger trains. What are the specific issues? Some cross-border tracks have fallen into disrepair, and could you reactivate those cross-border lines? That's category number 1. Category 2, in other places, tracks exist, but passenger trains don't run. The third category is where trains run at timetables are poor. The fourth category is informational ticketing problems that make things complicated when trying to cross the border. And we've got a fifth problem in Southeastern Europe. Some railways are so hopelessly broken, it's very, very difficult to know what to do in order to manage to fix those problems on the ground in those places. So those are the categories I'm going to go through in turn in this presentation. So that's a map of where I went in 2022, and out of that, I made some proposals to the European Union of 20 cross-border lines to fix. And this is the map of all of the borders that I crossed mostly throughout June of this year. I'm going to talk about some of those borders in what I say now, but if you have any questions about any of the borders other than the ones that I'm talking about here, then please, of course, feel free to ask me about any of the other ones as well. So far in the project, I've crossed 247 railway borders. That's the current summary total as of today. So far, 247 borders crossed or investigated in the last 2 and a bit years. So let's come to the individual cases. A international railway line which is no longer operable. It is the line which is in green and brown in the middle of the map that you can see on your screens. It used to be the main line between Zagreb off the top of the screen at the top to Split, the important Adriatic port at the bottom, most importantly connecting Novigrad, Bihać and Knin. And it particularly concerns this particular part of the line, which is known as the Una line. Now the difficulty here is that the line starts in today's Croatia. It goes into Republika Srpska, one part of Bosnia, then crosses into the Bosnian Federation at Bihać. And then between Bihać and Knin, it crosses the border of the Bosnian Federation and Croatia 7 times. Now, that is what you find when you go and visit this region. It's an amazing region with tremendous nature. And this is the first international railway bridge south of Bihać. On the left of the screen is Bosnia. On the right of the screen, on the other side of the river, is Croatia. And indeed, when actually going and trying to take this photo with the drone, we spoke to a local person who thought I was a refugee trying to actually flee across this bridge over to the Croatian side. I said, no, actually, I was just trying to photograph the railway infrastructure. Another viaduct at Kulen Vakuf, another village along the line. You can see here the line was even electrified in the late 1980s. Everything is comparatively intact, but no trains have actually been running for more than a decade and in regular passenger traffic for more than 2 decades on this section of the line. Some of the overhead wires have been destroyed. The copper has been stolen. But you can see from this plaque, which is to be found at the railway station of Bihać, this line was renovated between the years 1984 and 1987, so was actually renovated to a relatively good standard, and it would be the fastest railway line between Zagreb and Split, were it potentially to be reopened. Now, the advantage here would be is it would connect comparatively poor areas of both Bosnia and Croatia. It would speed up being able to get to the port of Split. But of course, politically speaking, it's very difficult to do because at the moment, neither Croatia nor Bosnia is in a position to be able to finance the investment for the reopening of this line. So out of all of the places I went, this is probably pretty much the only one. There's maybe only one other further example. That is the line between Imeno and Kumrovec. That's at the Slovenia-Croatia border. In this year's research, I found only 2 examples which I can point to say these are places where the line is not currently operable and is closed, and where with some political action it would make sense to reopen the line. So only 2 examples that fall into that first category, lines which are currently not active and you could potentially reopen. So those are the 2 of those cases that I discovered. Let's move to the second category. These are much easier to fix. These are places where there are lines that are active, but there are no passenger trains that are running. The most significant example of that I found was what used to be the main line between Zagreb and Belgrade, between or close to the relatively large town Vinkovci, and between the border villages Tovarnik on the Croatian side and Šid on the Serbian side. You can see all of that there on the map on the screen. At this border section of just 7 kilometers between Tovarnik and Šid, there are no passenger trains running, and no passenger trains have been running there since the beginning of the COVID pandemic. There was one daily train a day there until 2020. That was cancelled at the beginning of the COVID pandemic and not restarted. You could, on existing infrastructure, run a train from Beograd to Zagreb in 6 hours 45 minutes, which would be 45 minutes longer than the bus would take. But having taken the bus on that route would be a lot more comfortable to take than the bus would be for the similar stretch. What is the situation currently? There's a nice, neatly renovated station at Tovarnik on the Croatian side. A modern train runs every couple of hours from Vinkovci to get you to Tovarnik. It stops there in the middle of the freight trains on that rather narrow platform in Tovarnik. I put up the drone. You can see there's plenty of freight traffic crossing the border here, just no passenger trains that are crossing the border. When you get to the side of Serbia, they're currently renovating the station in Šid, and they actually have the 2004 timetable in Šid still hanging on the wall there. And you can see the numbers of trains that used to cross the border at that time back in 2004. There was even at that stage a train that used to go from Šid all the way to Venezia in Italy that you can find in the on the old timetables hanging up in Šid. And then from Šid on to Belgrade, you can see the whole station is in a bit worse condition than the one in Tovarnik on the Croatian side. There's 6 times a day a modern EMU goes from Šid all the way to Belgrade. Now, this is one which is very simple to solve. You should extend the trains from Tovarnik as far as Šid, or extend the trains from Šid as far as Tovarnik. The technical standards on both sides of the border are exactly the same. It would, technically speaking, not be difficult in order to manage to do that. You would need some political engagement of both the government of Croatia and of Serbia in order to manage to do that. And it would mean that it would be possible to finally cross the Croatian-Serbian border once more by train. Very simple to do, very cheap to do, needs a little bit of political will in order to manage to solve that problem. So that would be one of the easiest and shortest term things that would need to be fixed to finally reconnect those two towns together. There are similar situations like that at a few other borders in the region. They are Bogojevo to Erdut. This would be a connection ultimately that would get you from Osijek in Croatia through to Subotica in Serbia. The infrastructure, as you can see from the picture there, is nowhere near as good. It's not an electrified line and the speeds are low, but it would be very easy to extend the Croatian trains one station further across the border from Erdut through to Bogojevo. There is a similar situation at a Croatia-Bosnia border. It's near the nearest town is not Drenovci. It's actually Gunja on the Croatian side. But just again, extending the train one station across the border to the station of Brčko in Bosnia that has freight, as you can see from the picture that I took there that's on the screen. But at the moment, there are no passenger trains crossing the border there either. Again, a very simple, relatively easy fix. And Brčko is also a comparatively well-to-do city by Bosnian standards. You could do the same at the border further north from where I was talking about Bihać earlier on. The bridge further north across the Una between Volinja in Croatia and Dobrelin in Bosnia. This used to be the route that trains from Zagreb to Sarajevo would take. As you can see from the picture there, it's also a wonderful region. It's a single track electrified line in a relatively good state. But at the moment, all of the trains finish in Volinja on the Croatian side and start in Dobrelin on the Bosnian Republika Srpska side with 6 kilometers of track without any passenger trains in between. Again, with a little bit of political will, you could potentially solve that one. So that's the second category, a bunch of places where there are tracks which exist, but passenger trains are not running. So they should be easier to fix. The third type of problem is issues where trains run, but have such a poor timetable, no one can use them. An example of this is Sarajevo, Mostar, Šapljina, Ploče. Now, if I zoom in on the map here, you can see that in that section, Šapljina is the last station in Bosnia. And then there are 20 kilometers of track from Metković to Ploče, which are actually on Croatian territory. But those 20 kilometers of track are not connected to anything else on the Croatian railway network. So to get to Ploče, you have to transit Bosnia. Now, there are, if I go back one screen there are 3 trains a day each way from Sarajevo to Mostar. It actually works comparatively well. It's a relatively modern Spanish-built Talgo train. It's pretty good. One of those trains a day is extended across the border in the summertime to Ploče, which means basically the service is only pretty much any use for summertime tourists. it would be very easy and very simple in order to manage to extend that train. You can see it's even advertising the European Union a year for railways, the Talgo train, to extend the train across the border to Chapligne. Now, the European Union is financing a Chinese-built motorway in this region. That's my drone picture of the Chinese-built motorway bridge. So there is massive road investment in this region, connecting Ploče through to Mostar with this motorway that you can see in the picture. You can just make out in the bottom right of the picture the single track railway line there in the valley. It would be a very simple, basic thing to do to increase the numbers of trains each day and run them throughout the year to extend that final 20 kilometers from Chapligne through to Ploče to allow people to actually cross this border at times other than just for summertime peak services. It's also very important for tourists throughout the year because also Mostar attracts a lot of tourists as well. So you can improve the timetable at this one comparatively easily. There are similar situations with poor timetables on border lines, notably at some other borders, at the border of Serbia to Montenegro, the border Bielopolia to Kumanica. In the summertime, there used to be a direct daytime train all the way from Belgrade through to Bar. Now you have to change trains in Bielopolia in the daytime to cross this border in the day. And in the winter, there are no daytime trains at all, only a night train. That night train does run the whole way through still, but it has chronic reliability problems and very old carriages. So ultimately here, the classic old Yugoslavian connection, Bar, Podgorica, Uzice through to Belgrade, at the moment has been degraded, and that there is only now a direct train in the nighttime. Now, okay, you get a modern train as far as Bielopolia in the day, but nevertheless, it's nowhere near as convenient to use as it used to be, although at least there has been news this week that the border procedures at least have been speeded up at Bielopolia. There are similar situations further north. These are within the European Union at two cross-border lines between Croatia and Slovenia. Lurska Bistrica to Šapjane, this is the cross-border line from Pivka through to Rijeka that has only 4 trains a day that cross the border there, and there's at least enough traffic in order to manage to step that one up, and the trains run at weird times, and only 3 of them serve Ljubljana, the other one goes through to Villa Opicina in Italy. And then even worse is the cross-border line Rakitovic to Buzet. This is a line that runs from Pula through to Divača in Croatia that has only 1 direct train a day, which is basically then not possible to use for anything other than tourist purposes. All the Croatian trains end at Buzet, the final station before the border. It's an amazing scenic line, as that photo is testimony to. Again, you need a better timetable here to make this train actually viable for people to use on an everyday basis. So that's for category 3, places where trains run, but the timetables are so bad that no one can really use them. The 4th category, timetable and database problems. There is a severe problem in North Macedonia where the timetables as published do not bear any resemblance to what actually runs on the ground. So if you take the example of Skopje to Tabanovce, which is the village which is at the border to Serbia onwards towards Niš, there is a published timetable that shows there are trains in 2024 on that connection, but those marked with a red cross on the screen there simply do not run. Now, if you notice, the timetable actually says it's valid until December of 2024, but having inquired with a friendly member of staff in Skopje railway station, I was told the trains to Tabanovce have not actually run for the past 3 years. So North Macedonia Railways is actually publishing timetables of trains that don't actually run and don't actually exist. So there is a problem there between what is published and what actually happens on the ground. Now, if you're an outsider and you suddenly pitch up somewhere and hope that a train would even run, chances are you will be out of luck. So you actually need to line up what is published in the timetables with what actually happens on the ground. So it's a slightly different problem in timetabling than I've encountered in the past. That is Tabanovce station, by the way. You can just see there the platform in the background. The station is actually operable enough to run passenger trains there if anyone had any trains to actually run, or the Macedonian Railways could actually organise it. Now, the bigger problem that I encountered is there are 4 railways in southeastern Europe that have such chronic problems, it's very difficult to propose normal political solutions for these problems on the ground. The picture that you see on the screen is actually a 1960s ex-Swedish carriage currently running in the Bosnian Federation. Right, so Bosnia has two railways, one for each political half of the country, but the most severe problems are not in the federation parts, and that's basically, for those of you that don't know the politics of Bosnia, that's Sarajevo and Mostar. But the train that runs north from Sarajevo to the third city, Zenica, runs with carriages like that. It just about runs with these 1960s Swedish carriages, but it is just about workable. The problem is much worse when you get to the other half of Bosnia, to Republika Srpska and to the GRS, so the Republika Srpska railways. They have such a chronic lack of rolling stock that the trains from Banja Luka to Novi Grad and onwards to Dobrelin on the border to Croatia are run with an electric locomotive and one carriage. The trains that run from Banja Luka to Doboj across the middle of the country have just two carriages, and these are ex-East German railways, very, very old and not in a very particularly good condition. There is a chronic lack of trains that are operable to run in Republika Srpska at the moment. So before we talk about international railway lines, Republika Srpska actually needs working passenger trains that they could even run on these lines. Now, the quality of the tracks is actually not that bad. Trains can run at 80 to 100 kilometers per hour. There just aren't any trains that can actually be run there. Now, having taken the trains right across Republika Srpska, the trains are cheap to use and they do run, and they run relatively reliably. It's just they don't run anything like often enough because Republika Srpska Railways doesn't have enough trains to run. So ultimately there could be an opportunity there for potentially some second-hand trains from countries in Western Europe in order to manage to be run there. But at least give ZRS their due. They do at least actually run the trains, which is stipulated in their timetable, and they do have a viable ticket sales channels in their stations. It's worth saying that also, not only in Republika Srpska, but also in the Bosnian Federation, a lot of the main stations, these amazing brutalist 1970s stations, this is Banja Luka in the picture, so you can actually see quite a lot of the sort of grandeur of the 1970s and the 1980s railways here. Much worse, and probably the most dysfunctional railway in terms of operations that I've ever taken, are the railways in North Macedonia, MZ. This is a drone picture I took of all of the old 1980s commuter trains, which all just parked up rusting in the depot just outside of Skopje. The new trains that the government bought in 2015 from CRRC in China, only half of those Chinese trains are currently operable. They bought 4 diesel trains, of which 2 run, and they bought 2 electric trains, of which only 1 is even running, because they didn't sign a contract for replacement parts for those trains. So some of these trains, like this one, are just parked up gathering graffiti in the depot. And that's the overall picture. At the moment, for freight, Macedonian Railways, I was told by a friendly member of staff, currently has only 4 functioning locomotives for the entire country. 1 diesel, 1 large freight locomotive, and 2 small freight electric locomotives. And that you can see, at least just in that picture, there are at least twice that number of locomotives which are just parked up there, rotting and rusting outside of the depot. So before anything can really be repaired in North Macedonia in an even more urgently requires some new or some second-hand trains to put this problem right. North Macedonia has 2 what I would call as well phantom railways. The first of these, which is pictured here, is the line in the south from Bitola in the second city of Macedonia in the south of the country through to Florina in Greece. This line was renovated with European Union money. You can see they've even built a disabled accessibility ramp at this little village station just south of Bitola. But ultimately, there is only this halt at least gets 1 train per day. You can see that the line is complete through to the Greek side, the place where the change in the ballast is, the color of the ballast is literally the border. But wait, I've gone too far. At the moment, that line, with the works on that line, were all completed in January 2019, and no passenger train has crossed the border since. So you have a workable railway line, but with no trains running there, and there are bushes growing on the line on the Greek side. A friendly policeman on the Greek side told me that no passenger trains had run past his police station for more than 20 years. Now, not being content with having one phantom railway, North Macedonia is proceeding to build a second one. And that is at the border between Bulgaria and North Macedonia. This is the final station on the Bulgarian side, the village of Gioșevo. You can see that even though this village is a very small village of only 250 inhabitants, has a very grandiose railway station, because Bulgaria built this as its border station in 1913. Then came World War I, and they didn't complete the cross-border line to through to Kumanovo in today's North Macedonia. And then they tried again in the 1930s, but then came World War II, so they still didn't get it complete. And now the European Union is going to have a go to try to build this railway line. Now, the difficulty is they have started building the railway line at the Skopje end, starting at the town of Kumanovo. But as you can see, they've laid new sleepers and some new tracks, but they haven't completed the works. They've also started the works on the first part of the railway line without having committed the finance to build the very important cross-border section, which is a tunnel of at least 4 kilometers length through the high mountain, which is between Gioșevo and Kriva Palanka, the main town on the North Macedonian side. And were they to even complete the line out from Kumanovo, they haven't got any trains to run there anyway, even if you were to use it as a national commuter line in the short term before the cross-border section is complete. So ultimately, what looks to be happening here is the bad experience of Bitola to Florina. It looks like North Macedonia is repeating the trick on the border Kumanovo, Kriva Palanka through to Gioșevo. So that gives me quite some considerable cause for concern. Then two more. Kosovo. These are the tracks at the main station in Kosovo's capital, Pristina, a tiny little railway station surrounded by half-built skyscrapers. Almost all of the windows on board the train across Kosovo. I took the only train that runs each day from Pristina to the third city, Pea. Almost all of the windows are broken because children have been lobbing stones at the train, and no one has any money in order to manage to repair them. At least there are some building works going on in Kosovo to repair the line from Fusha Kosovo, which is the kind of junction station outside of Pristina, through to the border, through to Skopje in North Macedonia. You can see some of those new tracks there. But Kosovo is chronically short of rolling stock in order to manage to run those trains. It seems to have only 2 operable passenger trains that run in the entire country. So my fear there is even when the lines are repaired going to Macedonia, there won't be any trains running because no one has any trains that can even be operated on that route at the moment. Again, it's a problem that the European Union often commits to rebuilding of tracks without having committed to the construction or to the purchase of rolling stock to run on them. And last but not least, by a considerable distance in terms of the experience of taking it, trains in Albania are the slowest and the worst trains I've ever taken. It's probably not the most dysfunctional railway company, but it's definitely the most dysfunctional trains. That's the quality of the seats. It's an ex-Deutsche Reichsbahn East German carriage from the 1980s. You have opening windows because there are no window panes in half of the window. So I'm staring out of the window there, not because I put the window down, but because the window pane is missing. So luckily it was a dry, sunny day. But if you were traveling on this train when it was raining, I don't know what the hell you'd get inside with the wind blowing in through the windows. Also, no one has cut the bushes. So a lot of bushes kind of blow off through these broken, open or missing windows in the trains in Albania. Now, Albania, if you read up on it, Albania has grand plans to reactivate its railways and particularly to reopen the railway line from Tirana to the main port of Durrës. Now, this is a drone photo taken very close to the old central railway station of Tirana. And you can see with the arrow there, that is the right-of-way of the old railway line, which would have taken you to the old central station in Tirana, which is about 1 kilometer from Skanderbeg Square, which is basically the center of Tirana. Now, rather than reactivating that railway line, they are currently building this, a new railway station 4 kilometers out of the city, close to what is currently the Eastern bus station. Theoretically, according to the Minister of Transport, trains should be running from here in 2025. I will believe this when I see it, not least because this is the route of the future track, and there you can see they haven't started building either an underpass or an overpass, this being the main road out of Tirana to the north of the country towards Shkodër. So I'm not holding my breath that they'll have this one fixed by December 2025. arrive. I also find that the entire rebuilding plans for the whole of the railway in Albania are extremely poor. Rather than actually, basically, you'd have to rebuild the entire railway from scratch, and there's at least enough population between Tirana and Durrës via Tirana's airport to run a double track line. It's basically one 30-kilometer long city, essentially. But they're building only a single track line. It will at least be electrified. But that will mean that the capacity on this line will be low. And given how important these cities are in Albania, I find it two very bad decisions: to rebuild only with a single track line, and second, to place Tirana's central station nowhere near the center of Tirana. And those don't look like very good decisions as far as I'm concerned, and give me some great cause for concern. So it looks to me like this is like a box ticking exercise in Albania to simply just basically show, look, we're building a new railway, not to actually do something that ultimately would be workable. So that's the bad news from Albania. There again is a nice final picture of the cross-border bridge there from the Unna line. So I will stop the slides. I will switch back to the full resolution video. And now the floor is yours. First of all, Toma, to ask some questions, and then I'll keep an eye on the chat as well to answer any questions you may have about any of those borders, or indeed any of the other places that I went, anywhere else pretty much in the whole of that region.
Thank you very much, John. It was a really great presentation, and to be honest, it is the first time I saw some of those places. I was traveling through the Balkans, through the Eastern Europe several times in my life, and basically the situation was better something like 10 or 20 years ago. The final, let's say, the newest problems emerged after the COVID. And basically, the situation is not better now. The services, the cross-border services, were not reintroduced, and now we have the situation that, as you said, a lot of lines are operational or in use for trade, but not in use for passenger services. But basically, what is very problematic for me, and it is also a question of bigger political actions, is the fact that it is still possible, it is possible for Eastern European states to obtain the money for the investment in the infrastructure, but there is no guarantee that the states, passenger companies are going to introduce new services or to make the better timetabling. And basically, it is the most problematic thing for me when we are talking about the cross-border services or generally about infrastructure investments.
Yep.
Because, you know, in Europe there are several, especially of course in Eastern Europe, there are several very, very good state-of-art lines, for example in Greece.
Yep.
And literally there are no trains on those lines. So somebody, the European Union, is investing huge money into nothing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I must say also, building on that point, the infrastructure was not in all places as bad as I feared. So, for example, the line from Doboj to Banja Luka, the line from Banja Luka to Novigrad, the line from Sarajevo to Mostar, some of the parts of the main line through Serbia from Beograd to Niš. Some of the parts of those lines are actually in a reasonable condition. And so there is potential there to actually run more on the existing infrastructure. There are some places where the infrastructure is in a dreadful state and you can run nothing more. But actually, I have seen much worse in some other parts of the EU even than I've some parts seen in some of that region.
Yeah, basically, but there are still many examples where on the border sections the infrastructure is good.
Yeah.
And well, basically, for me, the most problematic thing is the timetabling. And for example, you have the border between Croatia and Serbia, between Tovarnik and Šid. The infrastructure is good. The stations are also in relatively good shape. And Croats are not going. Croatian railway passenger transportation is not. Basically, do we know how to do that?
Volume of your computer.
It's not the volume of my computer. I can't change it. I think I can't change the volume of another speaker,
Is it any
Sammy.
better now? Is it any better now?
Speak loud, Thomas.
Okay, can you hear me now? Is it better?
Yeah.
Okay. So basically, when we are talking about the borders, I start to talk about the Tovarnik sheet line, and also we can also talk about the services between Croatia and Slovenia.
Yeah.
The infrastructure is good, stations are good, but there are no services, or at least the timetable is bad. So even between Ljubljana and Zagreb, you have very few trains per day. You know, in Yugoslav times we had, which are 20 or even more trains per day. So the situation now is much worse, and it is not a question of the infrastructure, of some infrastructure investments.
So let's go to any questions from the audience. Are there any comments or questions that any of you have, or also if anything has been posted into YouTube, if Sammy, you can copy that across into the chat in the webinar there. Do you have a question, Borna?
Hi to all.
Go for it.
Okay, hello everyone. Thank John for presentation. We meet also in Zagreb, so we have like small seminar about the border stations. And maybe I can give you my experience 2 weeks ago. So I traveling from Munich to Zagreb, and we get delayed in Germany because of some tree on the line, and we stuck. We get we far away for Villach with 60 minutes delay, and the train for Zagreb leave, and the next train go in 1 hour, but only to Dobova. So this is the border station between Croatia and Slovenia, and it was very interesting that this train has one Taurus locomotive that is allowed to go to Croatia, and also first wagon to the locomotive was Croatian railway company, and third others was Slovenian company, and the train was like maybe 60% full of people, and until Dobova, around 100 people came to Dobova in the middle of the night, and then they start walking from Dobova to Harmica. This is the border station in Croatia. So it was very funny situation that in the middle of the night you have like 100 people walking from one station to another station. And one very fun fact, the Austrian Railways give this opportunity officially. So when you Google on Austrian Railway, you get these options like normal options. So you walk like 2 kilometers between two stations. So quite interesting that inside of European Union, we walk between the stations.
Yeah.
And across the border, it's not only between the stations, but
Yeah.
the borders.
Yeah, also
it
across
is
the
crazy,
border.
of course, yeah.
Yeah.
And you have like somewhere in some bushes you have like Slovenian police that protect the people from time to time. So very funny situation.
So
But why the huge question is why Croatian Railways passenger are not running local trains, local Zagreb suburban trains, not to Dobova. They're running the trains only to Harmica, but not to Dobova. And the huge question is why. Of course, we have to ask the company for that, for details, but nobody knows why the trains from Zagreb don't have the connection to Dobova.
So I didn't actually mention that one in particular in my presentation because I've mentioned that one in my previous research. So Dobova Harmica is a very easy one to solve, and because of the technical situation at that border, you would have to run the Croatian train to Dobova, not a Slovenian train across to the other side because of the differences of the electrification system. So the 25 kilovolts electrification reaches as far as Dobova, and you could manage to make the connection there. But there seems to me...
But the Slovenians now have the multi-system electric trains from Stadler. So according to what I know from the companies, they are going to run the direct train by Stadler Flirt from Ljubljana to Zagreb.
Right, but but the ultimate issue is the are we talking intercity and or longer distance trains, or are we talking regional trains across the border? Now, it would make sense to extend the trains from Harmica to Dobova, the suburban trains from suburban Zagreb, in any case, and also increase the amount of trains on the cross-border routes as well, and run those with modern Slovenian trains rather than the old locomotive hauled ones. Now, there is a semi-good example, but only semi-good. It's the new train that runs from Villa Opicina in Italy, near to Trieste, through to Rijeka. Now, so it starts in Italy, it goes through Slovenia, and it ends up in Rijeka. Now, the problem with it is it crosses those three countries. It's a modern Slovenian train, but the timetable is so useless, it makes it next to impossible to be able to use this train. So ultimately, and the only reason that even exists is because they found some European Union Interreg money to finance the operation of the service. Now, what you've got to find is ways and means of managing to support those operations in the early years of the operations of a train, and also run it for a few years. Now, my fear is that one from Villa Opicina to Rijeka is it's timetabled so badly that very few people will use it, meaning after 2 or 3 years, people will go, well, we tried it and it didn't work. Right now, so it strikes me that many of the railways in that region, particularly Croatian railways, it must be said, seem to have quite some difficulties with all of the railways on the other side of the border. And where simple solutions, just to running to the first station after the border rather than the last station before the border, it eludes them to be able to do that. So I'm going to go to the questions which I see in the chat there. So from Lord of Ixmore, what are the lines to influence this? Members of Parliament, individual experts, civil society? Well, I'm trying to do that as much as I can by talking to all of the decision makers that I can. So for example, when I was on this research project, I went to the the Green Mobility Summit in Sarajevo to try to present these issues to decision makers. I've spoken at multiple different events organized by the European Commission, some are even organized by the European Parliament, to explain the nature of these problems. And everyone earnestly goes, yes, we understand that that's really a problem, and then don't act. And so the difficulty is, and you may be sitting listening to this webinar going, yeah, okay, well, actually, there's a series of problems there that need solving. Now, the difficulty is who are the people on the ground who can actually act on these problems? The point that Thomas correctly raised, basically saying, well, you're building lines and then no trains are running. Now, someone in the European Commission should be checking whether that money was correctly spent and whether the projections for how many trains would run would then actually, whether those trains actually did in reality actually happen. Now, at the moment, when I ask the European Commission that, they say, sorry, we don't have the resources to check what is happening on the ground. Well, like, hang on a minute, you're relying on some guy who's running a crowd-funded project to go and research all of this on the ground to tell you what does and doesn't run. Well, come on, you should be able to do better than that. Now, you've got to find ways and means of finding those political decision makers who do have the power to act. And that's ultimately the only way of being able to advance to make progress here. Now, what I was very disappointed in with regard to the issue with for example, to adjusting the plans in Albania, is at the conference in Sarajevo with the high-level political decision makers, the plans for the rebuilding of all of the lines in Albania were praised by all of the speakers. Oh, we're rebuilding an entire modern railway. Well, yes, you are, but you're not doing it in a sensible way. Now, that critique, I couldn't make that critique to those decision makers because I didn't know the situation on the ground now. But I will look at Albania's plans for the future with different eyes now. There was also the situation, for example, that Montenegro's Minister of Transport had obviously never taken the train to Belgrade when he was giving a speech about it at that event in Sarajevo. Now, there is a very, very important point of what I would love to try to do, which maybe Ludovic gives you an idea, is to take political decision makers to the ground to show them what does and doesn't work. Only when you have seen the situation on the ground can you potentially work out what you might want to do in order to manage to fix it. And there is this big disconnect between what political decision makers say and what the reality on the ground actually looks like. And I'm trying in my small way to bridge that gap. Now, one thing you can potentially do, and that's something which I've had a bit of success with, for example, in Netherlands, is doing documentary film work about these problems on the ground to bring these problems to a wider audience. And had a bit of success with that in Southeastern Europe, notably in Croatia, but not so much. Now to the question from Adam, how much political support or demand for cross-border railway is there within the societies in these countries? Is it a topic for public debate? Somewhat, but not in a positive way, would be my impression. When I spoke to journalists in North Macedonia, they said, well, we know our railway is a basket case. Everyone knows it's a basket case, but what the hell do we do in order to manage to fix it? One member of staff I spoke to at one station in Macedonia said to me, she spoke some English, I am glad that you're researching all of this because we need external pressure in order to fix our railways, which was quite a depressing but also a very honest kind of an answer that I received from that member of staff. So the issue is ultimately, and sorry to put this bluntly this way, taking the train in Albania, in Kosovo, in Macedonia, to some extent in Serbia and in Croatia as well, is the cheapest way to cross the country. It is cheaper than taking a bus, right? And the people, particularly in Albania, that take the train there are the poorest of the poor of the society. Those people that are the poorest of the poor of the society are generally not the people whose view matters in the political system, unfortunately. So that leads me rather skeptically to say, well, actually, do those people's political pressure really come to bear? Now, let's answer that in a slightly different way. The situation in Serbia, which is receiving major investment in its railways, a lot of it coming from China, particularly to rebuild the Beograd, Novi Sad, Subotica route and onwards towards Belgrade. What you're essentially doing there is creating, I would say, an almost French-style two-tier railway. Between the big cities, it's modern and it will work well and business people would take it. And the rest, when you're on a line from Kraljevo to Stalac in the middle of the country and it goes at 30 kilometers per hour, that is the train that the poor people take because they've got no other option. Now, that, in terms of the society, leaves me deeply worried. So ultimately, it's exactly the right question to ask, Adam, but my impression, unfortunately, I'm rather negative and rather skeptical about the extent to which that's really being answered.
But I have to say just one very problematic thing, subject for me. You was talking about the cross-border service between Vila Opicina and Rijeka, and also about the railway situation in North Macedonia. The similarity here is North Macedonian trains are not running because the company didn't sign the agreement for the maintenance.
Yep.
The Vila Opicina Rijeka train is not running from Trieste because the Slovenian railways didn't order the signaling system, the safety and signaling system for Italy. So we have very similar situation basically. How companies are purchasing the new rolling stock, and basically, well, in my opinion, the companies don't have the exact plans how to use the rolling stock. For example, Croatian Railways passenger purchase a lot of trains, new trains from Končar, and those trains are not certified for any country in Europe apart from Croatia.
Yep.
So you can run, they have now I think 65 new trains, and none of those trains can run into Hungary or into Serbia or into Bosnia and Herzegovina.
Yep. No, so let's separate out what's political and what's actually operational. There is, there is no operational reason why you cannot certify a Conchar train to run to at least Bosnia and Serbia. Hungary is harder, but Bosnia and Serbia, it can run no problem at all, right? Now, it is just simply a political point that HGPP has not made the request for the approval for it to be able to run on the border section. Same for Serbia. The Serbian Stadler trains that run as far as Šid could easily run as far as Tovarnik, but the request has not been made. In fact, the only country that's actually got cross-border operable modern trains is actually the Bosnians. The Talgo sets are approved to run in both Bosnia and in Croatia, but the problem is they can't actually get the trains through Republika Srpska to get even then to Zagreb, right? So on one hand, you have a political problem. You also have the situation, the locomotives which were shown in the first slide, the what used to be Yugoslav Railway Series 441. They exist everywhere in the former Yugoslavia except Slovenia, because Slovenia had a different electrification system. The reason they don't cross borders is due to political intransigence, not due to a technical problem. The other situation, also at the border, for example, Romania to Serbia, you do have technical problems. At Hungary, Croatia, you do. At Slovenia, Croatia, you do. Now there, the railway companies and public authorities will always take short-sighted investment decisions. They will buy what's cheap, basically. Now, a solution here, if the European Union were thoughtful about it, would be a European Union interoperability fund. It would basically be the European Union would fund the difference for a railway company, be it a private one or a state one, the difference between a one-system train and a 2 or 3 system train that would be suitable for cross-border operation. Now, the situation of Slovenia-Croatia is exactly the same as at the border of Germany to France. Germany, Rheinland-Pfalz has just bought a fleet of new trains to run from Trier as far as Pell, the last station in France, without adding 25 kilowatts electrification, so the trains can carry on to run to Thionville. So you have that type of short-sighted decision to save a few euros by not ordering the multi-system locomotive exists all over Europe. And the European Union does not pay enough attention to that to make sure that actually you could add those extra systems onto those trains. So Slovenia, it's a bad decision, but they're not alone in taking that type of bad decision. Further questions from anyone here on Jitsi or likewise on YouTube?
I just want to mention that there are some positive progress. Several days ago, the new joint border station was opened along the Belgrade-Bar line.
Right.
So it is kind of, I think the passenger trains are going to save something like 25 minutes.
Yeah.
Between Belgrade and Bar, and it is quite positive for Balkans.
Right. So on that border point, there are 14 border crossings, the most important 14 border crossings in the Balkans, all of which are due to get joint controls. So Bielopolje, can't remember the name of the town on the Serbian side, Kuban.
Vrbinica is the
Right. Through to Uzice. That's the first one where the border station exists and the trains run. There is a situation where the border station exists, but the trains don't run. That is the border from Skopje through Hani Elazit to Pristina, because there, the border station exists in Hani Elazit, but they're rebuilding the line. So the border station is there, but the tracks aren't. So that will be the next one, which will ultimately work. I can confirm I went through a similar border station on the highway from Prizren in Kosovo through to Lin in Albania. There, the joint controls already happened on the highway. So it's basically, they're going to do joint controls in 14 of the most important Balkan borders, of which 10 have parallel railway lines. But at the moment, so far, Bielopolje is the only one where it's actually happening. And Hani Elazit is the second one where they've at least built the border station. But more of those ultimately will come. It will also happen at Dragoman to Dimitrovgrad at the border of Bulgaria to Serbia when that border line reopens in a couple of years. It will also happen at Tabanovce for Skopje through to Niš. So ultimately, it is a solid step forward. The problem is at the moment is in many cases, the places where they will have the joint border controls, there just aren't any passenger trains that are running. But at least Bielopolia is now actually finally fixed and done. Any prospects for Idomeni Gevgelia, I see as a comment. The answer to that is complicated. So the railway line across North Macedonia from Skopje to Gevgelia is a single track electrified line and is in a reasonable state. The reason not more trains are running on it, because it also serves Veles, which is I think the second or third largest town of North Macedonia. The reason there are not more trains running there is at the moment is the finances of the railways are so bad and they haven't got any trains to run. The track on the Greek side is also been heavily renovated recently, even cutting off some of the sharp corners, and is again a single track electrified line. And there is freight that runs on the whole corridor. At the moment, Greek railways have the problem that since the Tempe rail crash, passenger trains are not running on half the network where they should even run. Now, it's not because Greece are short of trains, but because the Greek government demanded a check of all of the safety systems to allow passenger trains to run once more. So at the moment, I'm not even aware of any proposals to restart passenger trains as far as Idomeni or Gevgelia, although I can confirm freight is crossing that border because I actually filmed the freight train crossing the border bridge when I was there. It's quite an amazing situation because there was a shepherd with a flock of sheep going under the bridge while a modern railway freight train was going across the top of the bridge. I'll post that picture at some point after this webinar. So ultimately, it's doable, but with North Macedonia on one side and Greece on the other side, until North Macedonia gets more trains and until Greece has actually restored passenger trains on some other parts of its railway network, like the line to Florina, which at the moment doesn't have any trains at all, I'm unfortunately, I'm not holding my breath. So that's why I didn't mention that one. Apologies for Lodovik who asked that question. So if those were more functional countries in terms of their railway policy, it would be possible to fix it. They're not, so unfortunately, that's not going to happen short term.
But John, let me know, you were in that area something like several weeks ago. What is the situation, the construction situation on the line between Macedonia and Bulgaria? Because I think last year or something like that, they signed an agreement, Macedonia signed an agreement for the construction of that line.
Right. You asked, so you will get the answer in all the gruesome detail. So the European Union has put together a funding package of 560 million euros for the construction of the line from Kumanovo, which is on the main line north to Niš from Skopje, through to the border, which is near the town of Kriva Palanka in the northeastern corner of North Macedonia. Building has started, but has not completed for at least the tracks and the stations, but not the electrification of the first 30 kilometers from Kumanovo, which is the flattest section. So there I have pictures of half-built railway stations and half-laid track, but with bushes and weeds growing all over it because they haven't done any work there for some years, right? But at least the bridges are there and the right of way is clear because there used to be until the 1980s.
But you know that the first 30 kilometers from Kumanovo to Beljakovce was in use during the Yugoslav railway.
Yeah, exactly. But it fell out of use and everything has been relayed, but not finished. So they have even replaced parts of the stone bridges with concrete bridges. They have put new ballast down, they have put concrete sleepers and new track down, but it's not finished. There are places where the tracks are not bolted together at the place where points have been laid. There are concrete blocks for half a construction of a new station at Kumanovo, but it's not finished. And there are no signs of any works being done to do the last bit. And even if they did, they haven't got any trains that they can run there anyway. All right, so that's the first bit. The second bit, they have given the contracts for the design work to get a track from Belgavoc to, yeah, sorry, it's a bit of a mouthful, to as far as Kriva Palanka. But the 560 million from the EU, importantly, does not cover the Kriva Palanka to the border section. Now, the towns, Gioshevo on the Bulgarian side and Kriva Palanka on the North Macedonia side are at about 600 meters elevation, and the border road in between is at 1,000, right? Now, you basically need at least 4 kilometers of tunneling, probably more, in order to manage to build that section, and money has not been committed, and indeed there is not even a finalized design for the most complicated bit. So ultimately, the European Union has these grand plans. We will complete the connection between Bulgaria and North Macedonia by the end of the decade, but no design has been done for the most complicated section. So I'm not holding my breath that one will get fixed soon. Also bear in mind that the part on the Bulgarian side, you can run trains as far as Gioshevo from Radomir, which is on the main line to Greece from Sofia, but it is a single track diesel line in a quite decrepit state, which for 20 kilometers goes through a deep gorge, which is very, very hard to manage to speed up. So ultimately, although the part that's missing, or when they started the project, 87 of the 89 kilometers which were missing were on the North Macedonian side, and just 2 kilometers on the Bulgarian side, you also need money invested on the Bulgarian side. So what I fear will happen is in 2 or 3 years' time from now, you'll get a train built as far as Kriva Palanka, where the tracks will just sit there and will be rusting. Nothing will be built from Kriva Palanka to Gioshevo through the border mountain. And you'll carry on having trains to Gioshevo on the Bulgarian side, which will run slowly. And everyone will wonder why we still have 10 kilometers missing at the border section. There are no signs of any work at all anywhere on the complicated bit between Kriva Palanka and Gioshevo. So that's the situation at the moment on the ground. It's a mess. So definitely it's much more messy than the news reports. And I must say, particularly disappointed by the lack of attention to that issue on the part of the European Investment Bank. Because when I've talked to the European Investment Bank, which is half funding it with loans, where the other half is a grant from Connecting Europe, the European Investment Bank is supposed to want a return on its investment. How the hell they're going to get a return on investment in a railway line where they've not got a plan to construct the final section, I haven't got a clue. And that worries me a lot. So, sorry, but it's bad news. Yeah. I see there's a question about Timișoara to Versace. That one was a big disappointment, to be honest. So I did a day. I started in I forget the name of the town. It's across the border on the Serbian side to Gimbolia, which is on the Romanian side, Kikinda. So I started the day in Kikinda, in the northern corner of Serbia. I cycled across the border to Gimbolia, the first town on the Romanian side. Took a train from Gimbolia to Timișoara, another train which was built in 1935 and was a dreadful train from Timișoara to Stamora Morovița, which is the border station on the Romanian side, crossed the border by bike and picked up a train again in Versace and took the train then from Versace then through to Beograd. The problem at both of those cross-border sections is the infrastructure on both sides where it is active is in a very poor state. Even to get to Gimbolia, the track is a single track knackered diesel line. Jimbolia to Timișoara does 40 or 50 kmh. Timișoara to Stamura Morovița, it does some places 60 or 70, but in other places it does just 25. The cross-border section, in as far as I could observe it, was likewise in a bad condition. And after Versace, and Versace has this amazing grandiose railway station, which is falling apart. Versace through to Pančevo, which is very basically the edge of the greater metropolitan area of Beograd, is also likewise a single-track diesel line which is not in a good condition. So basically, to run a Timișoara to Beograd, you've got something like 100 kilometers of poor quality single-track non-electrified line. And it is not one that at the moment Serbia is looking to prioritize. Now, Versace is an important regional center. It's something like 75 kilometers from Beograd. So running a train there with improved infrastructure would be a no-brainer. But at the moment, neither side is looking at improving it. So I can't really make proposals for how to improve Timișoara to Beograd because there's simply too large a part of it has extremely poor infrastructure. You could, I suppose, extend the regional train just across the border from Stamura Morovița to Versace. There's a bit of freight that runs on that one, but there's no freight even that runs on the cross-border section at Jimbolia. So, Kosti, my apologies, but that one looks to me to be a very, very difficult one, and there is no political will really on either side there. Romania wants to improve its lines towards Hungary. There's a bit of will from the EU to improve the lines towards Bulgaria, but Romania to Serbia, it strikes me that no one even has the basic political interest to fix that one. So unfortunately, I'm very, very pessimistic about those connections. And indeed, there's not even a proper bus connection from Timișoara to Versace. There is a proper long-distance bus that takes you from Timișoara all the way to Belgrade, at least. But at the moment, that's the only way of doing it. I had to resort to bicycles for the two cross-border connections. Are there any further questions? If not, then we'll draw the webinar to a close.
Well, John, what is your idea? What is your proposal? How to force the companies to fix the timetables to reintroduce the cross-border services after COVID and after everything else? But
well,
the situation.
You need to work in the places where it's doable. So I keep on raising all of these issues as far as I can. There are friends of mine who are active in political parties in Croatia, in Slovenia, not really in Serbia. But you do see that at least in Serbia, if there is a local political interest, Serbian Railways will take some interest in actually fixing things on the ground. Very interesting point on Serbia, by the way, as well, is there's all the controversy that the Serbian Railways have bought 3 new trains from China. They've also just bought 18 new trains from Stadler, built in Poland. Now, that's going to be a bigger change than anything else, actually, is those 18 new trains from Stadler, rather than the extra things that they're going to be getting from China. So it starts with the politics. Do your politicians want to fix a cross-border railway problem? And to do so, you need some political activism. And what I would ultimately say, and this is to anyone who's listening, or also those people that may then follow this webinar back afterwards, is it doesn't take much in terms of action or money to solve some of these problems, like Harmica Dobova, even Imeno to Harmica, Tovarnik Shid, Erdut Bogojevo. The solutions are cheap. Right? Now, that's the good news. So what's really, really important is that each of us uses the mechanisms and the audiences we have available to us to start to begin to apply political pressure. Now, I hear very often in the debates about railways, do we need more private investment or more state investment? That's not where you start. You start with a political consensus between politicians, either nationally or regionally on both sides of a border, that they are the ones that have to say, we want to fix this problem. Then we come to the level of how you fix that problem. And what I would like from the European Union, and hopefully from a new European Commissioner for Transport that will start replacing Adina Valian later this year, is to say, we, the EU, will push the member states of the EU and the countries in the Balkans that are not yet in the European Union to fix these problems on the ground as part of the accession process for those countries to eventually join the EU. So that's how I would go about it step by step. But ultimately, it needs political action first and foremost. And so basically, if you and I can help, and this is an open invitation to you, Thomas, and towards anyone else listening in the webinar, I can help you explain the situation on the ground, tell you places at the other end of Europe somewhere where they solved a similar problem. I can tell you whether the problem is financial, whether it's political, whether it's technical, whether it's a problem with the infrastructure. I have that knowledge. I can help start that campaigning work going. And I'll talk to anyone that wants to talk to me. The problem is you need political action to put these problems right. And in many places at the moment, we are missing that political action. And that's where I would ultimately start to begin to solve these issues.
Yeah, the other problem we have in Eastern Europe is basically not only connected to the cross-border services, but it is the problem that, especially in Croatia, but the situation is very similar also in Serbia. We have now enough money to invest in the infrastructure. The problem is that the construction works are everywhere, so the railway network in Croatia is not fully operational.
Yeah.
And this is the same problem in Serbia. We can say, of course, Serbia now runs 200 kilometers per hour trains between Belgrade and Novi Sad, but the problem is the rest of the network.
Yeah.
Those high-speed services are fantastic, I really have to say, but the rest of the network is really not operational.
Right, but
You need 6.5 hours, or even maybe several minutes more, from Belgrade to Niš. The
right.
distance is 244 kilometers.
So two answers on that point. First is, in the lines you can't upgrade, do the maintenance. The southern part of the line to Niš is ridiculous. Some places you're doing 35 or 40 kilometers an hour, and then the next minute you're doing 110. Because on the 110 bit they did the maintenance, and on the 40 bit they didn't. Right? So there are many places where simply maintaining the track to get it back to the design speed would be progress. Second, if you can't do that, and you've got a line like Kraljevo to Stalac, which is completely knackered, rebuild it from scratch and put people for 1 or 2 years on a bus. Because the bus will get them there at the same speed or even faster. And if you set the bus price for the rail replacement bus at the price of the train ticket, the people won't even complain. So if you do it that way, you can actually make some progress. Now, that doesn't solve all of your problems. Or take the Croatian situation. The line from Dugo Selo to Novska is an absolute nightmare. But there is another single track line south of that, more or less parallel, I think, through Sisak. Now, route your traffic through Sisak while you're rebuilding the Novska line and then do the reverse. Now, if you can plan it that way, or even the routes, if you think of the route Thessaloniki to Beograd, there are basically two ways of doing that. One is Thessaloniki, Idomeni, Gevgelia, Skopje, Tabnovce, Niš, Beograd. And the other is Thessaloniki, Kulata, which is on the border to Bulgaria, Sofia, Dimitrovgrad, Niš. Right, okay, the Niš-Belgrade bit you have to do in any case, right? But basically, Niš to Thessaloniki, you have two parallel routes, both of which need severe work. Now, the European Union, if it's funding the upgrades of those lines, needs to coordinate it to make sure that you don't have both of them out of action at the same moment. Yeah? But the European Union hasn't even done that thinking to work out how do we timetable this, to coordinate this, to limit the amount of impact that we have when we're doing those rebuilding works. So it's possible, so I take your point completely, Thomas, of course, but it's possible to solve those problems if you take the big picture, and the organization that can take the big picture should be the European Union. Huh? Anyway, that's the message for the next Transport Commissioner. Huh? On that note, I think we probably ought to close So thank you very much indeed for your comments in particular, Tom. Thank you for everyone else for having joined in. This will be archived on YouTube for anyone who wants to then watch it back. And there'll be plenty more in terms of conclusions from this project, which will be written up on the website of Cross Border Rail in the coming weeks and months. And if you want me to go into any of the details about any of these borders, or indeed any of the other borders I've researched, drop me an email and I'll be very happy to speak to you, railway companies, students, governments, you name it. And indeed, anything that you can find on the website of Cross Border Rail or on Flickr of the photos I take are Creative Commons license, so it can be used for reuse if you're a journalist or you're writing up anything about these projects. So thank you very much indeed from me. Sorry about the slightly ropey tech, but we got there in the end. And anyway, good night from Bourgogne, and there will be more on different digital media over the next weeks and months. Bye for now.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye. Oops. Okay. My phone is so hot you could cook a